All right, so our Chrome extension is starting to look really good. Our basic functionality is basically in place. We can start timer, we can pause the timer, we can reset it, add a bunch of tasks, delete a task, reset the timer. Everything we need for our Pomodoro timer is in place, except for the styling at this point. But one thing we might also want to consider doing is giving the user more customizability with the extensions by giving them more options. That way they can really tailor the extension to their needs. Some people might want to focus for longer periods of time. Some people might want to focus for shorter periods of time. We want to open it up to the user. So in order to do that, we should create an options page where they can configure these values. And heading to our manifest file, we'll add in that options page field. And we'll pass in the HTML file. And similar to our pop-up, what we're going to do is create a new folder called options and create an options.html file inside of there just to keep things a little more organized. So we'll create a new folder, options, and we'll create our three files, options.html and our JavaScript file and our CSS file, because we're going to be using them later on. And inside of our HTML file, we'll begin by typing exclamation mark to get our boilerplate HTML code. And we'll replace the title with something like Pomodoro extension options. And while we're at it, we'll add in a link tag to our HTML. That's options.css. And at the bottom, we'll add in a script tag, pass in our JavaScript. And inside of the body, we can just put an h1 in there for the time being, something like Pomodoro timer options. And we'll save this and refresh our extension just to make sure that the options are working, and it looks like they are. So let's think about how we want to give our user options for customizing this time. We could let them enter whatever value they want in a text field and then set the timer to whatever they want it to be, like 24 hours. But, that's probably not the point of a Pomodoro timer. It's supposed to be a fixed interval where you focus and do a lot of work. So we probably don't want them to spend more than, let's say, an hour on a single Pomodoro timer session. And for the lower bound, maybe we can do something like 1 minute. Although 1 minute isn't a very efficient session per se, there's not much you can do in a minute. We should give them a little more control in how they want to set up their time. And the way we can do that is by using a number input field. So I'll add an input here of type number. And some options we can pass in are a minimum value. So we'll set it to 1, and a maximum value, which we'll set to 60. And these will be allowing them to select in terms of minutes. We won't worry about like times like 24 minutes and 30 seconds. We'll use whole minute numbers just to keep things simple. And we'll have a default value of 25. And while we're at it, let's also add in a button called Save Options, so that they can actually save the values they input into the field. So if we refresh this page, you can see our number input comes up. We can click up and down to adjust the value. And you'll notice when we go to the one value, it won't let you go down any further. And you can also input numbers. But something interesting to note about these number fields is that if I put in a number like negative 500, it'll let me do that and won't really complain. I can hit the Save Options button. So we're going to have to do a bit of filtering to make sure that this doesn't break our extension. I'll set this back to 25 for now. Let's start handling the actual values inside of the input and the button by going into our JavaScript. And we know we're going to have to assign IDs to these in order to get access to them from JavaScript. So for this one, I'll just call it time option. And for the button, I'll give it an ID of save button. We'll save that. And let's go into our JavaScript now. So the first thing we can do is add invalidation for a number field. And the way we'll add invalidation is first by getting a reference to that option. So we'll do document.getElementById, time option. And then we'll add an event listener. And in this case, for this input field, we're actually going to do a change listener. So anytime the value changes inside of the input, we're going to check it. And in our callback, it takes an event parameter, which will tell us about the event that occurred. And the value we're worried about in particular is the event.target.value. And I'll console.log this just so that we can see what's going on. I'll refresh the page and we can inspect here and check out the console. But you can see anytime we change this, that number will pop up. So if we type something in like -500, that number does pop up in our console. So all we have to do is do an if statement. If the value is less than our minimum, which is 1, or the value is greater than our maximum, which is 60, we'll just go ahead and set the value back to 25. So we'll do time option value is equal to 25. And we'll save this and refresh. And you can see if we type in -5,000, it sets it back to 25. If we do 60 or 1, we'll be okay. But any really weird numbers, it'll set it back to 25, which is perfect. Okay, so now that that's working, the next thing we want to do is implement our save button. So I'll do a const save btn is equal to document.getElement by ID. And then we'll add a click listener. As a callback. And in here, all we really have to do in our Chrome storage is set the value of our time option so that we can keep track of it. We'll just create a new field called time option. Time option, and we'll set it to time option.value. In order to just keep things clean, I think a good idea might be to also reset our timer and set the isRunning parameter to be false anytime someone changes the default timer setting, because if they're changing the default timer setting, it's likely they want to restart their session anyways. I'll just set that timer to 0 and isRunning to false. This should now save our value. And inside the options, I'm also going to add in one little thing. I'm going to put in a label so that our users will know exactly what this input field is doing. Something like default time in minutes. And I'll put in brackets here 1 to 60, so they know that there's sort of a range to the time that they can select. If we refresh, we can see that shows up, and when we hit save options, we should be setting all these values inside. And we can actually check this out by starting the timer. Okay, we can pause it, still at this value, and when we hit save options, it resets. So that's looking good. Let's try setting this to like something like 30, and you can save options. Okay, so we see that it hasn't changed in the pop-up, and that's because we haven't implemented that on the JavaScript side of things. We kind of set this option, but we don't read it in the pop-up. But if we refresh the page, we'll also notice that this goes back to 25. And that's because we don't load in our saved value into the time option field. So we'll have to do that on the options page as well. So we'll do a chrome.storage.local.get, and we'll get that new field, time option. And in the results, what we'll do is we'll set time option.value equal to result.time option. And it's possible that the first time they load the options page, that this doesn't exist. So if you recall, in our background script, what we did to avoid those issues was we added these default values. That's something we're going to want to do as well with our time option, so that the default value is set to 25. So I'll save those options for now, and I'll refresh, and you can see that it does change to 30. If I set it to 50, I hit save, and I go to like 40 without saving and refresh the page, it goes back to 50. So that looks pretty good. And now it's time to go into our background script and actually read the time option field, because currently when we show the notification, it's hard-coded to be at 25 minutes. So the change on the background field or background script is pretty simple. We'll just add in time option, And all we have to do is multiply this by time option instead. Where's that time option? And we'll also add in that default value here. We'll do time option. And we'll just follow the pattern. And if it's not in there, we'll set it to 25. Cool. So our notification should work now, but we also want to edit this then, so that it says the correct amount of minutes instead of just 25 minutes. So we'll do time option in our template string, and we'll save that. And in order to test this, what we should do is set our timer to something short, like 1 minute, which is actually the shortest it can go. And we refresh the page and we see that the 1 minute is still there, so it's been set correctly. And we'll actually just start the timer. And what we should see is at 24 minutes that a notification should pop up, even though this time in itself is wrong. And while that's counting down, we'll actually head over to our popup.js, and we can see inside of our update time function that the reason it says 25 is because it's a hard-coded value in our minutes. So all we really have to do is retrieve the new time option from inside our storage, and instead of doing 25 minus, we'll do res.timeOption, which should fix this value. So we'll save this, and we can actually open up the pop-up, and we can see it's already fixed. We have 20 seconds left on our timer. We just have to wait it out, and hopefully a notification will pop up. And we'll actually close out of the pop-up to make sure that the notification is working if we even go to another page. And there it is. See, 1 minute has passed. So it looks like all of our timer functionality is working properly. We can now set this to something like 45 as well, and open the pop-up. It's at 45. Now if we set it to something like 60 and we save it, we do see that it says 60 minutes, which isn't common for these digital clocks. Usually you go up to 1 hour, but as soon as you start the timer, it'll go back to 59, which is correct. That doesn't look ideal, but it's one edge case that I don't think our users will worry about too much. And we can reset the timer still and watch things get reset. Setting it back to 25. Looks like everything's in order.